the deeper into hell that we go. And the closer we get to our nemesis, our ultimate villain, our ultimate final boss, don't be looking for some gigantic, larger than life, snarling, fire breathing, winged, horned demon. And that's fine for fantasy, Dungeons and Dragons and video games. No, you have to turn to one of the most popular movie franchises in cinematic history. You have to look at the Bond films. Before Daniel Craig, okay? Daniel Craig, Bond became more like the Bourne Identity and John Wick and all kinds of postmodern nonsense. You have to go back to the era of the gentleman villain, the villain who's a mirror image to Bond. He's everything that Bond is. He's well dressed, he's well spoken, he's suave, he's debonair, he's intelligent, and he's a spy. He's subtle. Bond, in no James Bond movie does Bond ever get into a fist fight with the villain. They never come to fisticuffs. When they're in the same room, they're drinking cognac or they're playing chess. It's all innuendo and it's all subtle. Everything's beneath the surface. It is the nature of our greatest obstacles, our greatest, most powerful adversaries that we face. The ones that are most like ourselves, and their subtlety, their cleverness, their maniacal genius. This is what we have to prepare ourselves for, because everything that turns our unconditional love into conditional love, and how most of the time we're not even aware that when we're speaking to people, we think we're speaking altruistically and we think we're speaking the truth and what they need to hear, but we're speaking it with all these conditions attached. I want them to acknowledge my contribution. Or I just want to be heard. Or you go down the line. And how often are you consciously thinking that? Never, ever are you consciously thinking that. No, it's your Bond villain, the man behind the shadows, who's just rumor and innuendo. What do you need to do? You need to be like Bond and penetrate all the outer layers of the defenses. And you have to go through your journey of intrigue, fighting all these lower minions that you do get into fisticuffs with, and these deadly maniacal henchmen that can derail you and block you and do the boss's dirty work for him. But that elusive arch nemesis, that elusive villain, the one that's threatening the entire world with total dominance, and he does it from the shadows, unseen, just the genius machinations of his villainy. How aware are we of these egos of ours? How conscious are we of our internal Bond villain, the one that is able to capture our cleanest, purest waters from the well and taint it with but a drop from an eyedropper, and taint it without us being aware of it, and recognize that the closer we get, the higher we get, the more clever and subtle our shadow gets. The closer we get to our ineffable true self, the more our shadow mirrors that subtlety, those ineffable qualities. And the shadow becomes truly not just a shadow, but a rumor. Are we aware of this? Do we know that this is what we face? Or do we think we're going to face some fire-breathing Balrog who's 4 stories tall? No. You are facing a Bond villain who doesn't even show his face. And when he does, it's a conversation over cognac. It's not fisticuffs. The most subtle and insidious, but diabolically clever. And we cannot afford to be naive. We cannot afford to be complacent. And we certainly cannot afford to do what so many do on the spiritual path. Believe that I'm awakened, I'm enlightened, my journey is over. Oh, I can see auras, I have this kind of clairvoyance, that kind of clairvoyance, I can talk with animals, I can read people's minds. I must be an enlightened Buddha. The lesson that we have to learn from this, one of the most popular franchises of movie history, is that we have to kill everything that we prize in ourselves, that we take possession of and believe we are so suave and debonair and charismatic and right? Because Bond is confident. Bond is a womanizer. Bond is cocky and arrogant as he is suave and debonair. Bond is everything that the villains are, including believing that he's on the side of the right. He's on the right side of history and he has a license to kill. But what Bond kills is a mirror image of himself. And Bond goes through a hero's journey, an arc in every one of those movies. We can look at those movies and say, that's just genre, pop culture, nonsense, so on and so forth. A movie franchise doesn't survive for 40 years. Again, we're not a fan of the Daniel Craig Bond movies because they broke the archetypal lessons at what we're talking about here. But into those classical Bond films, if we see them for what they are, the hero facing themselves with just a subtle tweak, that's all it is. The closer you get to your true self, the harder and harder and harder it's going to be for you to discern the egos that are conditioning your true self's will and the light and the love that your true self is trying to put into form in the world. People very rarely talk this way and very rarely talk about this. You know why? Because very few people know this. And yet there it is. In the entire Bond movie franchise, you can see it for yourself, which is why those movies are so beloved and why they survived for 40 years. There's no other franchise that has survived that long. Westerns died out. And now even Marvel movies have died out. Marvel couldn't sustain anywhere near that long. And it was a multi-billion dollar franchise. And yet Bond, 40 years, all these different actors, all these different eras. Why? Because of this archetypal truth that we are sharing with you. Who the adversary and the nature of the adversary is. And why integration of the shadow, as Carl Jung describes it, is so essential. We must recognize that our shadow is a shadow of us. The Bond villain is a mirror image to Bond. And in truth, all great drama and high art is here to teach us the nature of the eternal conflict between ourselves and ourself, between that which creates the division. And so from the psychological perspective of Carl Jung, the integration of the shadow is like Bond getting to that pinnacle scene, which is always the best scene in Bond movies. It's when Bond and the villain are in the same room having a chat, having a gentlemanly talk. It's the highlight of every Bond movie. Yeah, the action, the gadgets, the beautiful women, the sex, the what. Yeah. That's all fine when you're 13 years old and watching these things on rerun on a Saturday afternoon or whatever. But in truth, it's the interaction between when Bond meets his self, his shadow self. And usually, and this is the big joke, right? This is the joke of Bond movies that Austin Powers parodied and that everybody likes to parody, is the fact that when they do finally meet, oh, well, of course, the villain tells Bond his plan. He lays it out on a platter. And everybody makes fun of this. Everybody makes a joke about this. No, this is the shadow revealing the truth. This is the shadow self unveiling itself. This is the integration of the shadow. Bond finally learning what his nemesis is up to. And that's what happens when we observe ourselves, when we get close to ourselves, when we reconcile the shadow. So when we realize who the true adversary is, and when we learn, we extract, we comprehend how it causes us and other suffering. We learn of its grand plan. We learn of its diabolical plan to control the world. And we are the world, right? We are the world in microcosm. It's our world. Remember the thumbnail for today's live stream. Remember what we said about the microcosm. And remember what we said about you being the Lord of your own fiefdom, of your own kingdom, of your own world. So your nemesis wants to rule your world. You have this Bond villain, and the higher you get in rank as a hero, the closer and closer you're going to get to your ultimate nemesis. This is Sherlock Holmes and Moriarty. And that nemesis, whatever it is that you face, is as subtle and intelligent and genius. It's far more than you are. And you may say, well, I don't believe that. Really? Have you compared a mountain climber to Mount Everest lately? Why is Bond put into these impossible circumstances? He has to rise to the challenge. He has to become more than what he was. That's why every Bond movie, there's an arc for Bond. There's a character arc. There's a hero's journey. And in truth, your ultimate nemesis can only be defeated by your higher self, by your true self. You can't do it. Certainly not alone. And if you try, you will fail, because you will be approaching a mechanical entity with nothing but your mechanical faculties. And it'll just be exhausting, just draining all your energy. And guess what? Your ego is going to be happy. Your nemesis is going to be happy, going, hee hee hee, I'm getting all the energy and I'm getting all the consciousness, and he's going nowhere fast. I've got him in a stalemate. The best you'll ever get is a stalemate if you don't surrender to your higher self, if you don't hand over the reins to your innermost hero. At some point, you have to cross through this gate behind us here and reconcile yourself to the fact that you're not qualified. You're a mechanical and physical vessel only. The ultimate reconciliation, the ultimate reversal of division that grants you the vision and that grants you the power and ability to even go up against your nemesis like Bond is surrender. The recognition that you are not qualified. You are a pulley system and a vessel, but you're not the one who goes into the well and gets the water. That bucket and that rope is essential. And that bucket is your innermost being, your monad, and your rope is consciousness. So coming back full circle again. The higher you rise, the deeper you have to go. And the deeper you go, the higher you rise. But that means the length of your consciousness has to increase. The scope and depth to which you are present and aware and conscious must increase, must lengthen. So that means meditation, self-observation, self-remembering, as we discussed many, many times, and really paying attention. Because again, when people react to what you're saying or how you're saying it, don't always assume it's just because they're being closed-minded. Where is my Bond villain? And how is my Bond villain doing his subtle machinations behind the curtain? It's a whole other lifting of the veil, is it not? You have to reorganize the apparatus of your mechanical self and reposition your vessel from being the source, as many people think it is, to being a servant, to serving the true source, or at the very least, serving your true vessel for the true source. So in our case, Attila serves Atlas, who is a vessel for Allux. Doesn't mean that we're going to spend all our time watching James Bond movies. We're way beyond that. What it does mean is we have a lot of work still to do, a lot of work before everything that we have to give flows well and truly unconditionally. James Bond has to kill his nemesis. He has to face his nemesis, comprehend his plan, and eliminate him, which is eliminating himself. This is all allegorical and metaphorical. We're talking about psychological death here. But the closer we get to our higher self, the closer we get to the most subtle shadows of ourself, the most difficult and the most challenging. And that's why James Bond is who he is and has to be who he is, because anyone less than that will fail.